Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Amanda Lamb. In today's deep dive conversation with WRAL's Adam Owens, we're going to talk about his experience covering Hurricane Ian. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Start by telling us, for people who don't know, what is the storm tracker? Because that was your vehicle for the storm.
Yeah, in its most simplest form, it is a massive truck. It sits high up so that it can handle the weather. But the real magic to the storm tracker is inside the vehicle. There's just tons of technology. It's basically our weather center that we have in the studio on wheels. But you ride around a bit in it, you also realize that it's also a crowd pleaser. People are very,
I'm sure,
very drawn to it. But it looks cool, and it is cool, and it's fun to ride around in. But at its heart, it's the technology inside that can tell us everything from the wind speed to location, all kinds of things.
Okay, so set the scene for us. You and your photographer, Jamie Munden, loaded into the storm tracker to begin your journey. What was your assignment? I mean, what did they tell you they wanted you to do, and where'd you go?
Well, the initial idea was get as close as we can to the initial landfall, which we all know was devastating and in southern Florida. But we also didn't want to get so close that we weren't around resources that we would need to do the job. That meant that we went north of where the landfall initially took place. We were in Gainesville, Florida, for a while, just starting to talk about how we were watching it come ashore and things of that nature in the state. But the idea was, once the hurricane did reach our location, that we would be very nomadic about it, that we would pick up where the storm was, and as it joined us, and follow it state to state, Georgia, South Carolina, all the way into North Carolina. And the idea was this was eventually going to make it to our state. So we wanted to give our viewers a bit of a preview of exactly how the storm was treating people where it was, so they'd have a better idea of what to expect.
So did you see any damage, or were you north of that?
We were north of the heartbreak in Florida.
Gotcha.
Initially, but it was after we left the Gainesville area that we started to move along the coast to follow along the storm.
So basically, you're chasing the storm. It's like the people that you see in the movies that, head out there right into the storm. You started in Florida, you went to Georgia, then South Carolina. Where did you first start to see some real storm conditions?
The real deal was in South Carolina, because this was a hurricane that made landfall, left into the ocean, and, revisited. And we wanted to be near, as close as we could, to where the landfall would be in South Carolina. And for many of us looking at the path of the storm, that was going to be Myrtle Beach. That's exactly where we set up. And we hunkered down, got the storm tracker in a position where it could be used as a great a news gathering tool with all the cameras it has on it, but also where we would get a lot of use out of the instrumentation, getting a lot of readings that were coming off the ocean. But we were essentially right on the ocean front in Myrtle Beach, essentially where it made landfall. And at times that got quite rough. So
when you're doing this, do you ever go, what in the world am I doing? I mean, who does this? I know that thought has entered my mind many times, having covered storms, dating back to 1989, Hurricane Hugo. And I know that, you stand there sometimes with that pelting rain and the wind, and you're like, what is this all about? I mean, does that enter your mind?
It certainly does. But, and I don't know if this is the same for you, Amanda, but when I get the call from the station that we want you to cover this hurricane, one of my first questions is, are you going to send me to where it's really going to happen? Because you can cover hurricanes from different positions, some far from where the actual storm is tracking, some right in the middle of it. Either way, you're going to be maybe cold, wet, dealing with all these different conditions. If you're going to be doing that, for me anyway, I would rather be at the point of the spear. If I'm already going to be having to deal with inclement weather and bad weather, trying to report out in it, I'd rather be where it's interesting, it's changing all the time, essentially where, a landfall situation might be, right where it's happening.
I agree. I agree. We'll be back after the break with more from Adam Owens about what it was like when Hurricane Ian made landfall in South Carolina. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with Adam Owens about his intense coverage of Hurricane Ian. So, Adam, when we left off, you're in South Carolina, you're in Myrtle Beach, it's making landfall, you've got high winds, incredible storm surge, flooding. Just set the scene for us.
Well, we were out near a pier. The name of the pier escapes me right now, but we're out near a pier on Myrtle Beach. And we were initially, when we woke up and got ready, we were told, hey, listen, around 11:15 today, that's when there's going to be a high tide. So that, in addition to the storm advancing on us, which it arrived around, I'd say around 1 or 1:30. But they said the combination of those two factors is something you might want to pay attention to. And we were keeping track of that, of course, in the storm tracker with that, with all of the instrumentation and technology in there that I was telling you about. But when we were initially on the beach, and we were the only ones out there, except for a few emergency workers, we were able to walk a certain level down the beach, and there was plenty of sand, even at high tide. But we were hitting live shots for WRAL, I would say like maybe every 15 minutes or so because of where we were located. And every time we hit, we were running out of sand, more and more and more. The wind started to pick up. The pier that we were standing next to was high above the waves. And by the time we were running out of sand, because we were had to advance behind the dunes because of the storm surge, the waves were now kicking up and hitting the bottom of the pier that seemed nearly impossible. Perhaps just a couple hours ago, it finally got to the point that we had to retreat to the building line where you normally see the hotels there on Myrtle Beach, because all the sand, the dunes had been swallowed up. And it was after that point that the winds picked up to a point when I could tell that the eye wall was either on us or on its way, very near, where we started seeing debris from buildings around us flying all around. And that's when you have to really reassess your safety, because I remember one particular moment where I was working with a photojournalist, Jamie Munden, and I remember one particular moment, I'm facing him, and he's standing next to the truck, and we're talking about our safety. Do we need to move? There seems to be a lot of debris on the ground, and it could easily be picked up. It was a short 20-second conversation, but halfway through it, 10 seconds into that conversation, a large piece of debris flies from behind me toward him and just smacks the side of the truck. And that answered the question for us in that moment.
Absolutely. I remember during Hurricane Florence, I was in a parking lot, and all of the crew was in the truck shooting out of the back of a rental truck to keep the cameras dry. And a piece of sheet metal came behind me in the live shot, and I didn't see it, but viewers did. And so we got a call from the newsroom saying, hey, you might want to get to a safer spot, because it didn't look safe to see that flying by your head. So, there's always a moment in everybody's storm coverage that is iconic, that everybody remembers. And for you, it's that shrimp boat, is that fishing boat, right?
That's fair.
It's the Shana Michelle out of Holden Beach. It ended up on the shore. The crew had to be rescued. Tell me how you came upon that, and what did you learn?
Like a lot of things, it was a rumor going around on social media. I was trying to follow as many locals as I could and use certain search terms that locals might use, because they know the area. We're visitors. And there was talk of this boat. And then someone from the station here in Raleigh also contacted me saying they were hearing and seeing the same thing. Then finally a photo appeared, and someone happened to post on that photo, can you believe this? And it was a rough shot of the boat. And they mentioned roughly where it was located. We found out later it wasn't exact, but we went in that direction. The moment I saw it on my phone, I said, we have to get this visual. So we rushed there, and we were some of the first to arrive. And it's pretty incredible to see it completely sitting out of the water. And by that time, the storm had passed us. So how far away it was, the bow from the breaking waves behind it. It gave you you know how much it takes to float something that large and that heavy, and then to see it sitting where it's sitting is only further evidence of how high the storm surge got and how tall the waves were to push something so heavy. But it was not long after we did our first few shots that word did get around, and it became like a major attraction in Myrtle Beach.
I'm pretty sure every time somebody talks about Hurricane Ian in South Carolina for the next decade, that picture is going to be used of that boat. But there was damage. I mean, there was damage to the piers. Tell me about the damage that you saw in that area.
Yeah, there was a pier. We were told that there was a pier that lost the tip of it. We found one that had lost a section in its midsection, just pulled away. So there was a lot of docks, any number of docks that were being found in the middle of the street on in Myrtle Beach and in some pools and some of the hotels. Wind damage, which was a secondary concern to storm surge and flooding in the area, was more significant, I think, than some people thought. The hotel was missing its roof and a lot of facade. There was a storm surge in some of the stores as well. I talked to an officer off the record, and I was asking him, since he lives there and he's been there for a long time, where does this fall in terms of, how you feel this storm treated Myrtle Beach? And he says it's one of the more significant, and they didn't necessarily assume that it was going to be the case because it was a Category 1, and they've seen some stuff over the years. It was a Category 1, but it affected them in multiple different ways. Normally it touches them in one or two ways, when you're covering this event. It was really bad in these ways, but they kind of got the whole spectrum.
Yeah, and I'm sure you've learned, as I have, that categories do not always equate to damage, that it can just, the damage can be devastating at a 1. I think one of the things that I always think about when I'm covering storms is that you don't want to be tone deaf. I mean, there was devastating damage in Florida. Here in North Carolina, there was a lot of serious flooding and damage in Ocean Isle. So it's that balance, right, of understanding that other people have it worse, but we're going to tell you what we have right here. So how would you compare this storm to other storms you've covered in terms of what you experienced?
It's interesting you mentioned having that perspective, particularly with what they dealt with in South Florida. We were tried to be aware of that all the time, but even the people we were interviewing were. I would ask them. I remember talked to a lady on one of the piers, the pier that was missing its midsection, and I was talking to her about it, and she was a little heartbroken. We visit this all the time. She was retired with her husband, and that became a place they visited nearly daily when they were in the area, and they spent a lot of time in that area. But she caught herself at one point in the interview and just stopped and said, "You know what? This is nothing compared to what they were dealt in South Florida." So there was that perspective that was always there. As far as comparing it to other storms that I have been in, you're right in that categories are important. Is how how you're gauging the storm. They are and they are not in other ways. And that this one, looking back on it, if I was unaware of the category it was, I may have given it a higher number. Based on previous storms I'd been in, based on what we saw quite literally flying all around our head all the time.
Right.
Based on how much of the beach is gone in Myrtle Beach now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your coverage, and thank you for sharing your journey with us and your insight. We really appreciate it. This has been the WRAL Daily Download, a production of WRAL News. Check out my 2 true crime podcasts. What Remains focuses on solving cold cases with forensic science. Follow the Truth is about the murder of Michael Jordan's father in North Carolina in 1993. Find What Remains and Follow the Truth on your podcast app.